Good evening, everybody, and thanks for showing up tonight. I see we've got about 27 members, and thank you to the leadership of the Fresno Audubon for setting this up. So tonight, I'm going to show a number of PowerPoint photographs of the birds of Belize and Tikal, Guatemala, Tikal National Park. We have several photos of some unique birds there, like the orange-breasted falcon. We have a couple of photos of that bird. Essentially, just a little overview of Belize. Belize is approximately the size of our state of New Hampshire, about 14,000 square miles. And New Hampshire has 477 species of birds. Belize has currently, if you use eBird, and that's my source, 597 species, about 120 birds different. And of course, with global warming and birds moving north, New Hampshire is liable to pick up some species. We don't know about that, but things are changing quickly. Belize is on the Caribbean slope of Central America. And of course, Guatemala being on the Pacific slope. The Caribbean slope is much more humid and moist and has a greener habitat. Many of the principal cities that we use for lodging are on the Caribbean coastline. And so we have a great variation of birds from waders and shorebirds all the way up into the Maya Mountains, which get as high as 3,700 foot elevation, when those are pine oak type forests. In the Caribbean itself, the Pacific slope, the Caribbean slope, including parts of Guatemala on the Caribbean side and Nicaragua, there's 564 species just on that side of the slope. And of those, there's 14 endemics for the Caribbean slope that are shared between Guatemala and Belize and Nicaragua. Of those, 3 are endemic just to Belize, and we'll have some photos of those birds. One is the black catbird, another is the golden nape tanager. So here we go. I'm going to share my screen. So birds of Belize, and a brief showing of birds Tikal National Park in Guatemala. I've been introduced, you know who I am. I have a tour company that's been in business now for 22 years. We've been leading field trips into Belize for 8 years. And we did get a trip off in 2020. We entered Belize on March 3rd, just as the pandemic was being known in the Western world. And we left on the 13th and got into Houston as our point of entry into the US. And of course, there was no COVID testing or masks stipulations or anything of that nature. And so this year we did not go, obviously. It was just too risky, and we didn't want to put ourselves through that. So here we go. 9 years worth of photos. This is a map of Belize, and you can see Guatemala's here. The Mayan Mountains is run from in through Guatemala up into Sonora, Mexico, and come all the way down, if you can follow the cursor. And then they go back into Guatemala, all the way down at the southern end of Belize. So all of this, as we're seeing, the Cortazal, Orange Walk District, and Cayo, and Stand Creek District, and Toledo, which are equal to our counties, but they call them districts. All of these are part of the Caribbean slope. And of course, this is the Caribbean, and many, many islands, which they call the Keys. And Belize was given its own government in 1959. It was British Honduras for a long time. And it became its own country with Great Britain giving the locals their own autonomy and their own government. Guatemala wasn't too happy with that. They wanted a seaport into the Caribbean, and they thought that the British should have given these areas to Guatemala. So they would have had an interest all the way from the Pacific to the Caribbean. that didn't happen, and there is sometimes some animosities, but we're bird watchers and try not to get into that. We start our trip tonight in a second here at Crooked Tree. We fly into Belize from Houston. You can get in from Atlanta, Miami, Houston, and Los Angeles. Here we go. Water birds from Crooked Tree, a Belize Audubon Preserve. The Crooked Tree Preserve is a reservoir. It's used for drinking water. It's on the New River, and we use the Bird's Eye View Lodge there and have been using them for quite a few years and quite happy. And we take a boat trip out each morning, and one of the first and early birds that we see in the morning is the bare-throated tiger heron. And actually, this bird here is a little bit shorter than our great blue heron, but it's just got such a massive presence that, you know, for your first visit into Belize to see this bird early in the morning, you're really shocked. It's just has a lot of plumage, as you can see, all this barring on the throat, all the way down into the upper bib. Has this strong rufous throat marking, and then of course the rufous here, yellow under the bill, big eye, just because of a lot of times we'll see it in the mangroves, and it needs that big eye to see its prey. On our boat trips, we see dozens, if not hundreds, of wood storks. They're common in that Crooked Tree Preserve. The jabiru, which is the largest bird in the Western Hemisphere, not the largest bird in the world, but the largest bird in the Western Hemisphere, is a nester, nests in the Crooked Tree Preserve. And here you see it with white ibis and spoonbills. We're back in the far portion of what we call New River. We're out of the reservoir now. Now here's a great blue heron popping its head up, and that looks like a snowy egret. This is a jabiru nest with a jabiru juvenile bird, a hatchier bird, approximately about 6 weeks old at this stage. Just a huge bird. We try not to bother nests. We ran on this bird quite by accident. Had we known a nest was there, we probably wouldn't have been on that trail. But it was interesting. Got a few photos and got out of there. Rosette spoonbills are common also along the edges of the reservoir. Get to see quite a few of them. Limpkins, another species that is in great numbers. The reservoir, Crooked Tree Reservoir, has been stocked with a number of different fish, and many of the eco lodges buy the fish daily. And if you're staying at any one of the lodges for dinner, you're liable to have fish entree as well as a local beef or pork. So there's quite a few wading birds and divers in the reservoir with this good population of different fish species. There's another limpkin, a juvenile plumage. Northern Jagana. These are very common. They're sort of like our common moorhen. Least grebes. We find the least grebes on stock ponds. We do use a private cattle ranch towards the end of our trip for 2 days, and on the stock ponds, we're lucky enough to find least grebes. Blue-winged teal are common there in Belize and on the reservoir. Black-bellied whistling ducks, we find big populations of them. Onto raptors. In Belize, raptors in Belize are found in all types of habitat. Here's a bat falcon. The stocky bird, my photo may be a little deceiving. It's not much bigger than lengthwise than an American kestrel, but it's got a pretty broad set of shoulders, this girth here. And it eats bats and birds and insects, etc. So it's a bird that, you know, all the potential prey species are always on the lookout for it. And we see, you know, many of these throughout the trip. They're like kestrels, if I mentioned a minute ago. Here's a little closer look. Once again, you can see the width of those shoulders and the upper chest. Once again, a big eye, white throat, and they perch a lot. So once again, you know, those of us that are used to seeing American kestrels and you look for them on telephone wires or telephone posts or other little fence posts, bat falcons are easy to find because you're sort of like looking and just in tune with that type of sighting. Here's the orange-breasted falcon. It's a specialty bird of the Tikal National Park. In all of Central America, the last census in 2010, there were 11 pairs or 22 birds. And the orange-breasted falcon, with all the information I've been able to glean out of the internet and websites, is the furthest north in Central America. They go all the way down into Costa Rica and Panama. And then in South America, the population isn't under stress at all. I won't say they're common, but they're uncommon, and you can find them in numbers in certain countries. Gray-headed kite is a riparian kite, different than our grassland and oak savanna white-tailed kite. Black-collared nighthawk is found consistently along the New River and the entranceway from Crooked Tree Reservoir into the New River area. And here's a better photo. And here's that black collar. And they are a fish eater, not predominantly. They eat rats, they'll eat snakes, but they will take fish and crawdads. And occasionally we'll have them down on the riverbank or the reservoir shore. Bicolored hawk is an accipiter in the same family as our Cooper's hawk, sharp-shinned hawk, and northern goshawk. This bird is about the size of a northern goshawk. We found this bird along the Lanai River, a little bit out of Crooked Tree, but regardless, we got a good photo. Bicolored hawk, this is a juvenile. This is a large buteo. Spectacular tail, more tail than body, not quite the size of a red tail, more maybe a broad-winged hawk, something smaller in that general range. Roadside hawk are also a common hawk. When we get all of our birders together and we're in a van taking off from the airport, I alert everyone to just watch all the power lines. This is very similar to our red-tailed hawk, maybe even more numerous. And once again, they'll eat anything from a crawdad to a rat to another bird. They like the drainage pits along the highway, and that's where we see them and throughout the trip. Is they seem to really like that type of habitat where it's wet and moist and open, and they have a lot of opportunities to feed. This is a solitary eagle. This is a juvenile bird. This is not an adult hatch-year bird. Large, not quite the size of our golden eagle or bald eagle, but certainly larger than our larger hawks, like a big red tail or a big ferruginous hawk. This is a white hawk, as you can see. And we find this hawk up in the Pine Mountain Preserve in the higher elevations. This bird I took on the summit of the road into Pine Mountain Preserve at about 3,000 feet. And pretty interesting bird, spectacular. A common black hawk, large, wide wings, as you can see. Occasionally we get one of these in California. We've had a few, I think, around Stockton in the Delta. We've had one up around Santa Rosa in the Dig Laguna. I'm not sure about Fresno in Southern California, maybe along the Colorado, but they are a riparian type of buteo. Kites, swallow-tailed kite is also found at the higher elevations in the Pine Mountain Forest, and of course along the Caribbean coastline. And they migrate up from South America along the coast, Caribbean coast, and go into Florida and possibly Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama. I'm not too sure about Texas. They might end up around Beaumont or Galveston. Laughing falcon is just that. Once again, for us in the United States in the upper North America portions, laughing falcon is a life bird for many of us on our trips. But before the trip is over, we might see 5 or 6 of these birds. They like the citrus groves. There's a lot of citrus agriculture in Belize, limes, lemons, and other type of citrus. There's some avocado, there's some palm oil, but this particular bird seems to like the citrus orchards. And while this particular photo is inside an orchard, we'll see them also on fence posts and on higher trees that might be around buildings and dwellings in small towns and roadside buildings. So once again, raptors, as we all know, we're always looking for them. It seems like they're either perched or we find them in the air, but they're somewhat easy to locate if we're out focused on finding them. Phrygianus pygmy owl. Of course, anyone that's been to the King Ranch down in around Brownsville, this is a local bird for the U.S. 48 contiguous states. But in Belize, we'll see 2 or 3 of these on a field trip. And of course, they're always out hunting, and we find them calling more often than by eyesight. This is a Stygian owl, and it's a large bird. It's bigger than our great horned owl, and it's part of the pine savanna habitat. So behind Bird's Eye View Lodge, there's a large sand dune type of complex that's a couple miles long and maybe a mile wide, and it has this long needle pine similar to what we have in East Texas and West Louisiana, and that's the habitat they like. And Stygian has something to do with Shakespeare and a dark presence. There's a dark forehead over here, so that's where the name comes from, Stygian owl. Ponds, wetlands, lakes, and reservoir birds. Russet-naped wood rail. We find these throughout the trip. Wherever there seems to be a reasonable, wet, consistent habitat, we'll find them out and out eating. And it seems like they're easier to see than our sorrel rail or our Virginia rail or our Ridgway rail. They're just always out. They're sort of like, they don't care about human intrusion. Pretty bird. Semi-palmated plovers, we get those in Fresno, I'm sure. You're going to have that virtual wetlands tour on Saturday. You might have some there out at the wastewater treatment pond. Wilson's plovers, they don't stay long. We catch them on migration along the Caribbean coast. Solitary sandpipers is another one that you could see at this in the morning at a pond, and on the way back in the evening, passing the same pond, it's gone. They're migrating to North America from Central America, and we catch them during March as a early part of the early migration, and they're moving up through the Yucatan and along the Caribbean coast of Mexico into Texas, and most likely in through the Mississippi Flyway north. Louisiana water thrush, we're fortunate to see them every year, different than the northern water thrush. This photo is a little bit out of focus, but great big super white supercilium down into the nape is one way to tell this from a northern water thrush. But then the chestnut or off fawn color vent area is a big, strong ID mark. And so we're always happy to find northern water thrush through the spring migration. Also, a species that goes up the Mississippi Flyway. We see them on occasion in Illinois and Wisconsin, Minnesota, where they may be nesting. Hummingbirds. Okay, rufous-tailed hummingbird is common. It's equal in density, population density to our Anna's hummingbird. I don't know how many we see on a trip, but it's sort of the default hummingbird before the trip is up, and very common. very active, like an Anna's, always feeding, always defending a territory. And that's where it gets its name. And with the right lighting, that the tail just lights up. It's very spectacular, exciting bird to see work. White-necked Jacobin. There's a couple locations we know where to find these. It's not a very widely distributed hummingbird. They're a large hummingbird, 5 inches. You can see how big they are. And they're also always defending a territory. They're not too friendly with other hummingbirds. The eco lodges that might have them with hummingbird feeders, generally the lodges have 4 or 5, 6 or 7 feeders. And the Jacobin always has one just for itself. It's a pretty intimidating bird, a little bit of a bully, but spectacular to see. Golden crown wood nymph, another interesting bird, hard to find. You can see I post-dated this photo back in 2014, that's 7 years ago. We've been going back to this location on our field trips and been fortunate enough that this bird or its offspring is still alive, and we're able to get this as a life bird for many of the birders on our trips. So, consistency on the trips really helps, knowing where to go and to find some of these elusive birds. So all the trips we've taken add up to a lot of value for the clients. Forest and jungle habitats. I mentioned earlier that Belize is on the wet side of the Maya Mountains, the humid side. So other than the Pine Mountain Preserve, which can get pretty warm and dried out, the rest of the habitat is damp, humid, jungle-like, plain chicalaca. We don't see many of them. They're hunted. They're a food source for many of the locals, but we do see them. But they're leery of humans. They're not like the roofed chest rail that I showed a little while ago. That's always out on the, not always, but we see them roadside. This bird is a little difficult to see, but we do find them. They're noisy, and this is another bird. We'll hear them way before we see them. Good sized bird, bigger than our pheasant. If you can imagine our pheasant, the chest is bigger. And I think this is probably what the natives go after, is those chest cavities, right? Food. This is an interesting tanager, the gray-headed tanager. So most of us are, probably all of us are familiar with our western tanagers and summer tanagers and other species that are local for us. And they're always typically high up or mid-story in trees. Of course, we see the summer tanager feeding on bees and other species, but not too much on the ground. Once in a while, we might see a western tanager on the ground. The gray-headed tanager is always on the ground. This bird is probably 6 inches from the ground, and we find them in the deep understory, very, very low, or on the ground. If they're perched like this, it's never more than maybe 10 inches, and they feed in the understory. So the gray-headed tanager is always a spectacular bird. It's the size of a western tanager, or the summer tanager. It's a pretty good sized bird. Northern Putu is part of the four-wheel family, and you can see, they have this big open bill, and here's an eye. This bird was taken in the morning on the Hannah Ranch that we use on the last part of our trip, and of course it's perched on a limb. And with this plumage, if you don't know what you're looking at first, you might just think it's a big knob on a branch, sort of like that, but bigger. But it is a bird, and they're a nighthawk of type, and they hunt at night. Here's another look at one from the bottom up, and you can see that plumage along with the barks on the tree, a dead limb. They're fairly hard to locate, but we do manage to get 1 or 2 per trip. We're always looking as we're driving down the roads with wooden fence posts. We're always looking to see if we find one perched. Squirrel cuckoo is just a huge bird. It's probably like a magpie jay. It's big. It's bigger than our yellow-billed magpie, your Fresno Audubon logo bird. Just a big bird. We do get to see the mangrove cuckoo. That would be a North American, or I should say, lower 48 specialty bird. They're found in Florida. I don't know if they're found anywhere else. At least people don't report them. But we do see mangrove cuckoos in the mangroves along the Crooked Tree Reservoir, New River, and the mangroves along forests along the Caribbean coast. Trogons. We see a number of different species of trogons. Generally, we go inland. These are jungle birds, deep forest birds. We do go into Coxcomb National Park, which is south central Belize. We do a one-day trip, an evening, a full day, and overnight, and then we're gone the next day. And trogons are a specialty in that park. Here is one of the endemic birds for Belize. It was called for a long time the ambergeish catbird. Ambergeish is one of the islands or keys. And for a long time, it was just endemic on this one island. But the bird is being seen now in the Caribbean mangrove forests on the mainland. And so recently the name was dropped to black catbird. So if you get an up-to-date field guide, that's what you'll see. It's a beautiful bird. It's just metallic black, big red eye, and not so secretive, sort of like our gray catbird, always calling and singing. So when you're in the right habitat, you'll see this bird. And now they're seen on the mainland. So at one time we were traveling to Ambergeish Key for this bird. There's two ways to get to the Keys. One is they have a very active airport, a couple trips a day, or the more adventurous way is we take a sea taxi from a port, the main port in Belize City, and it's about a 2-hour boat ride that stops at a couple of the other keys before you get to Ambergeish. You can get into a little golf cart, go birding, and catch the night taxi back to the mainland and get to your hotel. So Belize is really an exciting field trip. It's just so much adventure, and the primary language of Belize is English because it was dominated by the British for well over 100 years. And so it's easy to get around, easy to communicate, and it's just fun. There's a lot of things to do, and good food. Everywhere is good food, and the water is drinkable, both in the city and at the lodges that we use. Here is the Montezuma oripendula, and they're a really large bird. This is a 12-inch bird. It's just big. It has a big width to it, big wings, and of course, as you know, it's a nest builder is a silk sock woven with all these types of vines, grasses, and reeds, and they hang from these big, large mahogany trees, and they're a colony nester. So you can have a tree with a dozen or more nests, and all the male and females coming and going. If it's post-hatching and there's juveniles in the nest, there's a lot of chatter going on and adults coming back and forth with food. Sort of a common bird in Tikal. In the back portion of the lodge we use, that's where this photo was taken, was in Tikal National Park. There are a couple large nest trees that we find in Belize along the way. Sometimes the nest trees aren't active for 1 year. If there's been a hurricane that comes through and wipes the nest out, we may not see the bird on that particular trip, but find it the following year. So storms have a big impact on these nests that are suspended from these branches. White-fronted parrot, sort of common, easy to get photos of. And of course, you always hear them way before you see them. Meadowlarks are interesting. Back to the Hannah Ranch that we use. I mentioned it 3 or 4 times. So the Hannah Ranch is an active equestrian ranch with equestrian trips. into both Guatemala and into Mexico, into the Yucatan. There's a big preserve that straddles Belize, Mexico, and Guatemala, and it's the Rio Bravo Preserve, and they take horse trips into that area. But so we use the lodges there. It's a cattle ranch, so their pastures are grazed. So we get a lot of different grassland birds, and it's an interesting spot because the time we get there in March, it has the eastern meadowlark. You see the difference in the plumage, and of course, if you're into bird calls, the bird call is so much different than our western meadowlark, which also can be seen in Belize during where it might winter, and we get there just at that eclipse time when birds are getting ready to go back north. So Belize, you can see both the eastern meadowlark and listen to it. You can see the western meadowlark on the lower right and listen to it. And these are photos from the Hannah Ranch in their grassland, grazing land for cattle. Yellow-throated euphorbia. There's a number of euphorbias, and they're all very colorful. They're a little bit bigger than our lesser goldfinch, maybe in between a lesser goldfinch and a house finch. In between that on size, always brightly colored, and they like fruit. So all the lodges have fruit stands, and of course, in the morning when you're having your coffee, you don't know whether to have your coffee, your camera, or your binoculars. Always a lot of fun. Fork-tail flycatcher, sort of a common bird. We'll see many of them. That's the back nape. Interesting bird, big bird. Pied-bill woodpeckers, we'll hear them. Those of us that are familiar with the pileated woodpecker call, their call is very similar and it throws itself around. You don't know if you have a northern flicker or a pileated or a pied-bill. And then you just have to hunt the forest until you find an old dead tree, and that's where you're going to find them. Just a magnificent bird. Tropical mockingbird, not too common. You have to almost be in a small town where the homes have a little garden going with flowers. This one is full of pollen, I think. You can see it's been sticking its head in some sort of trumpet plant. And in the bigger cities, we find them. Lasson's motmot. This is another bird that is very low in the forest. It's higher than the gray-headed tanager that I showed earlier. You'll find it 4 to 5 feet up, but it catches its prey swooping down insects, both flying insects and insects on the ground. And just a pretty bird. Yucatan jay, not seen everywhere in Belize. You have to go up into the far northwestern corner of Belize, almost Mexico, to find this bird. So this is another endemic bird to Belize, Yucatan jay, big bird, almost the size of our yellow-billed magpie. Certainly bigger than a Steller's jay or a California scrub jay. Golden-hooded tanagers. This is another specialty bird. This is one of the 14 endemic birds along the the Caribbean slope, the humid belt of Central America, male and a female here. And of course, as you can see, they're on I don't know where my cursor went. They're eating fruit out of a fruit plate. Wild birds, still pretty, but free food. I think everyone likes free food, including humans. Marlettes, seed eaters. We find these on the cattle pastures. These are males. There's a small colony of these in the U.S. in San Diego, right over the Tijuana River in the Tijuana Preserve out of San Diego. There's a couple dozen birds there, and there may be more now. Red-capped manakin. We find these in Tikal National Park in Guatemala. And I don't have any video of them doing their little dance, but any of us that have watched any of the bird YouTubes or anything on PBS, they always seem to have 3 or 4 of these guys dancing on a limb. So we get to see these in Tikal. We don't see them in Belize. White-collared manakin is a Belizean bird and a Guatemalan bird. And they tend to not be so hyper as the red caps, and their dance routine isn't as consistent. We do find them in little groups of 4 and 5. The ocellated turkey in Tikal National Park in Guatemala, just a beautiful bird, and all this beautiful plumage. And then his whole face, he or she, is always full of warts. And you wonder, all that beauty, natural beauty, and then they got all those warts. And you can see here, all these warts on their face, all this beautiful plumage, just a gorgeous bird, just spectacular. And somehow they have acne. I don't quite get it, but gorgeous bird. Find them in good groups, just like our North American wild turkeys. There's always, 15 or 20 of them. Spring warblers in migration. This is one of the reasons why we pick early March to do our field trips into Belize. Is many of our northern 48 and lower Canada nesting warblers come out of Belize and Guatemala. They go through the Yucatan, they follow the Caribbean coast around, and either they go up north through possibly eastern side of Mexico, the Rio Grande, up into New Mexico, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Alberta in Canada, or they hit the Mississippi River flyway that takes them up to Mississippi and Tennessee, Missouri, Arkansas, Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Saskatchewan, and those areas. And we find these birds, their early breeding plumage. Now, this is not a migrant. This is a yellow warbler, the mangrove warbler. It's a subspecies of the bird we get. I just threw it up there. We don't see this bird on every trip, but we look for it. We have it a number of times. It's a hard bird to find. It's a yellow warbler with a chestnut face, forehead, cheek, and chin. Beautiful. Tennessee warbler, we do see throughout our trips. Tennessee warbler, those of you that are into warblers, that little white flank, of course, is a big ID issue. That black line through the eye, that little off-colored supercilium. Tennessee warbler in pre-migration plumage. Yellow-throated warbler are fairly common. Get to see those in a number of different spots. Of course, they're so bright, and they sort of like humans. They're just sort of used to humans, and they'll get close for photos like this. The palm warbler, chestnut on top of the head, and big old white chin, yellow in the vent, really a soft yellow, not almost fawn brown color, really washed in, outer white tail feathers. Palm warbler, proprietary warbler, cavity nester, needs aquatic areas, not an inland bird. You find it in cavities and in areas that have been flooded and a lot of dead trees. This one's in breeding plumage. Indigo buntings, we see grassland birds. See them in the open pastures and grazed areas and in weedy areas in front of buildings or roadsides. This one's going into full breeding plumage. Banana quits. I'm going to get a drink of water for a moment. Banana quits, we find it at the very high country in the Pine Mountain Preserve. And of course, they're throughout the Caribbean. Cuba would be one area, and Dominican Republic, and all of the countries along the Caribbean coastline. Oh, another palm warbler, different pose and a different habitat. This looks like a mangrove habitat. Black-throated blue warbler. See these fairly often, if not every trip. Black-throated green are really common. Blackburnian warbler, somewhat common. See them on every trip. Cape May warbler, a little less common, but we see them. They're there. We look for them. Sometimes we get them in mixed flocks. Kentucky warbler is another ground bird. You see them walking around like a northern water thrush or Louisiana water thrush. They're a stout bird. You can see how big they are and long legs for walking. Oh, yellow-bill magpies. My favorite bird, name of the company, Yellow-bill Tours, and then your mascot bird for Fresno Audubon. This was taken in Alameda County, maybe Stanislaus, but on Mines Road. And they're certainly not in Belize. I just threw that up for fun since I saw that your mascot bird was a yellow-bill magpie. So groove-bill Annas are sort of everywhere. And they remind me of a bunch of puppies. Look at them. Wouldn't you just like to hug one of those? And they're saying good night and thanks for attending tonight. You just went through 84 PowerPoint slides. And a little advertising. This is Yellow-bill Tours field trips for 2022. As you can see, we have a March 1st, 2022 field trip into Belize and Guatemala. And I'll make a pledge tonight. Anyone that signs up for this trip and mentions that they saw the presentation on the Fresno membership night, I will donate $100 to Fresno Audubon. You just have to tell me you saw the presentation, and we'll take $100 and give it to Fresno Audubon. How about that? We do New Mexico and we do Nome. The Nome trips are pretty much booked, and we'll start taking reservations for 2023. So thank you all for sitting through 84 slides, and if there's questions, we're going to screen those out and I'll answer. I'm going to try to minimize my screen. I don't know that that's possible, but anyhow, we'll get there. I think we can do that maybe, or is it that? Yeah, okay, here I am. So, and there's Rachel. Hi, Rachel.
Hey,
Questions.
I'm looking through the chat box right now. I'm seeing you're getting a lot of compliments, but as of yet, I'm not seeing any questions. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to go ahead and type those in the chat box. Ann Chadwick says, fantastic presentation, Rich.
Thank you.
Monty Chimino says, great presentation. Kathy Phillips says, beautiful. Judy says, wonderful presentation. And Nancy Gilmore says, that's very generous. Very generous to donate to Fresno Audubon, and she thanks you for that. But no questions yet.
Okay, good. Oh, it's fun putting this together. And I don't know, I guess we did it in about 40 minutes. So we probably did a slide every 30 seconds. So.
Yeah, you blew right through those. You did extremely well.
Yeah. I was a little nervous when I first started talking to Robert. And I said, I've got 84 PowerPoint slides. What are we going to do here? And so he said, well.
Total says, let's see, what did she say here? Oh, here's a question. Now we've got a question.
Okay.
Okay. Janet Bodel says, lovely slides. And Jay McLean is asking, how long is the Belize trip?
7 days. That includes the call.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah,
all the details by day are on the website. If you go to the Yellow-bill Tours website, field trips, scroll down to Belize, and I outline every day where we're going to stay, potential birds that will be seen, etc.
Okay.
Yeah. We'd love to donate $100 to Fresno Audubon.
Karen Cobb is asking, she says, I am a novice, hence my question. Here, let me pull this up so I can read it again. I am a novice, hence my question. Why is there so much color in birds of Belize?
Probably for one thing, evolution, of course, and the food sources that they consume would be certainly another. All of the birds are basically black feathered until the sun hits them and does different beautiful things with the feathers. And there's a lot of sun in Belize, so that has a contributing factor also.
Anyone else have any questions? All right, well, we'll give it another moment, and then if no one else types any questions into the chat box, we can go ahead and wrap it up. Check one more time.
I see we had 25 participants. Thank everybody for showing up tonight. It's really was fun to put it together and fun to deliver it to you.
Well, it was wonderful, and actually, there were 30 participants. I think 5 of them dropped off just as you wrapped up. So you had more than that.
Well, thank you.
Well, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat box, so we'll go ahead and kind of wind this down. Oh, I see. Okay, something just popped up. 1 second here. Okay. All right. So Janine says, thanks again for such a great presentation. And Tay Cherry asks, what is the weather like in Belize in March?
Calm. It's after the rainy season and hurricane season. And along the coastal areas, days are 80-ish, very high 70s, 80-ish. So I failed to mention this. Belize is on the Tropic of Cancer, which is halfway, down to the equator. So it's a very mild climate. We don't run into rain, and there's no winds. It's just very stable. And the warm part of the trip is, as I brought up a few times, Pine Mountain Preserve. You're up pretty high, 3,000 feet, and there's a large plateau on top where you get a lot of sun. And it could probably be 85 to 90 on that particular day. We don't get dirty on these trips. I work with the people going on the trips on what type of clothing to bring. We do a lot of trail birding. Trails are generally well marked and compact, so we don't get muddy. I do like people to wear long sleeve shirts and long pants, no shorts, because you can get insect bites. But the weather's really easy to work with in March.